I said, "What the hell is going on here?" He said, "We're not allowed in the garden room."
You thought you knew Jerry Lewis. The rubber-faced clown, the howling man-child, the guy who made the whole world laugh until it cried. But behind the pratfalls and the wild, high-pitched voice was someone much more complicated, a boy born into show business, a genius who changed filmmaking forever, a man adored by millions, and resented by some of the people who knew him best. A hero on television every Labor Day and a stranger at his own kitchen table. A comedian who spent his life chasing love from an audience, even as parts of his own family walked away. This is the side of Jerry Lewis most people never saw. Jerry Lewis entered the world on March 16, 1926, in Newark, New Jersey, as Joseph Levitch, and he was born into show business the way some kids are born into farming or the military. His father, Danny, worked the vaudeville circuit. His mother played piano at a radio station. While other kids learned to ride a bike, Jerry learned timing, how to feel a laugh coming the same way musicians feel a beat. By 5, he was already on stage. By his teens, he'd invented a nightclub act where he lip-synced to popular records, throwing his body into every note like a cartoon come to life. Before MTV, before music videos, there was this skinny kid in a cheap suit, mouthing songs into a dead microphone, tearing up nightclubs and figuring out how far he could push an audience before they broke into hysterics. And then, in 1946, fate walked in wearing a tux and a smooth baritone, Dean Martin. If Jerry was a live wire, Dean was cool water. Where Jerry mugged and flailed and exploded, Dean barely seemed to move. Together, they were chaos and charm, the perfect collision of opposites. In smoky clubs, on radio shows, then on live television, Martin and Lewis felt like something new, dangerous, and joyful at the same time. Hollywood came running. They turned out box office hits like My Friend Irma, At War with the Army, and Scared Stiff. Studio executives loved them, the public adored them, and for a while, Martin and Lewis were the highest-paid act in the world. On screen, Dean teased Jerry. Jerry worshipped Dean. Off-screen, they were brothers until they weren't. Success, ego, and exhaustion did what they always do. By 1956, after a decade together, the partnership exploded. They stopped speaking. The last nightclub show ended not with a hug, but with a walk in opposite directions. Fans mourned the breakup like a divorce, but Jerry didn't fold. He reinvented himself. Going solo, Jerry Lewis signed a lucrative deal with Paramount and set out to prove he wasn't just half of a team. He started writing, producing, directing, and starring in his own films, something comic actors almost never did back then. He wasn't just the goofy guy in front of the camera, he wanted to control everything behind it too. In 1963, he made The Nutty Professor, a twisted, heartfelt spin on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. As Julius Kelp, the hunched, nervous scientist Jerry was fragile and heartbreaking. As Buddy loved the slick, arrogant alter ego, he was a razor-edged version of confidence itself. Some people swear Buddy Love was a savage parody of Dean Martin. Jerry always denied it. Either way, the film showed something no one could ignore. Underneath the slapstick, he understood loneliness, insecurity, and longing, better than anyone ever gave him credit for. And he wasn't just changing characters. He was changing the way movies were made. On set, Jerry grew frustrated with waiting for film to be developed to see what a shot looked like. So he came up with a system. Run a video camera alongside the film camera, feed it to a monitor, and watch playback instantly. The video assist was born. Today, every director in Hollywood relies on that idea. In the middle of falling down stairs and walking into walls, Jerry Lewis quietly changed the technical language of cinema. If America sometimes rolled its eyes at his later movies, France did the opposite. Over there, he wasn't just funny, he was art. Critics compared him to Chaplin and Keaton, analyzing his framing, his use of color, the way he controlled chaos inside the frame. French film journals wrote serious essays about a man Americans mostly saw as a clown in a too-tight suit. While you, S. Reviewers began calling his work corny or out of touch. France hung medals around his neck, including the prestigious Legion of Honor. To them, Jerry was an auteur, a complete filmmaker whose fingerprints were on every frame. He used to joke, "In America, I'm a goof. In France, I'm a genius. I live somewhere in between." But if his career sometimes felt like a roller coaster, his other role, the humanitarian, was relentless. In 1966, Jerry became the face of the Muscular Dystrophy Association's Labor Day Telethon. Every year, for decades, he was there. Sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, voice cracking at 3 a.m. As he begged America to open its wallet for kids, he called his kids. He sang, he cried, he told stories, he brought out celebrities, and he refused to go off the air until the numbers on the donation board climbed higher. Over the course of more than 40 years, those telethons raised billions of dollars. For a generation of viewers, Jerry Lewis wasn't just the nutty professor, he was the man who spent his holiday weekend trying to save children he'd never meet. The relationship with the MDA eventually became strained. He stepped down and controversies swirled. But the impact of those marathons, the awareness, the funding, the hope never really faded. Underneath the clown makeup, there was a man who needed to feel useful, and the telethon gave him that. Professionally, the later years brought surprises. In 1982, Martin Scorsese cast Jerry in The King of Comedy as a late-night host harassed by an obsessive fan played by Robert De Niro. Gone were the wild faces and funny voices. This Jerry was quiet, weary, almost painfully real. Critics who had dismissed him as an overgrown child suddenly had to admit he could act. He kept working, popping up in films, television, and on talk shows, telling stories with the kind of sharp, sometimes brutal wit that reminded people his brain was always 3 steps ahead of the punchline. Awards groups lined up with lifetime honors, honoring a body of work that spanned from black and white slapstick to modern digital cinema. But while the public nostalgia grew warmer, his private life grew colder. Jerry married singer Patty Palmer in 1944, long before the tuxedos and telethons. Together they had 6 sons, Gary, Scott, Christopher, Anthony, Joseph, and adopted son, Ronald. From the outside, it looked like a classic mid-century showbiz family. The famous dad, the beautiful mom, the big brood of kids. Inside, it was messier. While he was building an empire, Jerry was also chasing other women. Affairs weren't whispered secrets. He eventually discussed them openly, even bragging in later interviews about romances with some of Hollywood's biggest icons. The house may have been full, but his attention was divided, and the strain took its toll. One woman, Susan Minaret, who later took the name Susan Lewis, claimed for years that Jerry was her biological father, the result of a relationship he had with a model in the early 1950 seconds. She sought recognition, support, and at least a public acknowledgement. Reports of DNA testing linking her to one of his sons fueled her case, but Jerry never publicly accepted her as his child. Her story, years of hardship and obscurity, stood in stark contrast to the wealth and visibility of the man she believed was her father. For Patty, the constant infidelity and emotional distance were too much. After 35 years of marriage, she filed for divorce in 1980. By 1983, it was over. One of Hollywood's longest marriages had quietly collapsed. The second act of his personal life looked different. Shortly after his first marriage ended, Jerry married Sandy Pitnick, a dancer and actress he met on one of his films. She was 25 years younger, but by most accounts, their home was calmer, steadier. They adopted a daughter, Danielle, in 1992, and Jerry doted on her in ways his sons said they had never seen when they were children. To some, that tenderness was a sign of growth. To others, especially his older kids, it felt like proof that he'd given his best affection to the audience and saved only a small portion for the ones who shared his last name. The deepest break came later, not on camera, but in ink. In his final will, Jerry Lewis did something that shocked even his harshest critics. He explicitly disinherited all 6 sons from his first marriage and their children. Everything went to Sandy and Danielle. No explanations, just legal language that said, in effect, you get nothing. His eldest son Gary spoke out, calling his father mean and emotionally cruel, describing a childhood full of distance, criticism, and a desperate hunger for approval that never came. For fans who grew up watching Jerry care for strangers' children on the telethon, those words were a punch in the gut. How could the man who raised billions for sick kids leave nothing for his own? The truth, as always, lived somewhere in the murky middle, a place of hurt feelings, old wounds, and stories that never made it to the press. Then there was the secret romance. In his later years, Jerry hinted in interviews and private conversations that he'd shared a deeply personal relationship with a famous actress from Hollywood's golden age, a woman who, he implied, preferred women, and lived under the constant fear of being outed in a homophobic industry. He never named her outright, but he described her as brilliant, brave, and burdened. "She let me see the real her," he said once, "not because she needed a beard, but because she needed a friend who didn't lie to her." People have speculated for years about who she was, tossing around names like Barbara Stanwyck, Marlene Dietrich, Tallulah Bankhead, but in the end, the mystery is part of the point. Jerry's story with her isn't about tabloids, it's about secrets, trust, and the quiet courage of people who loved in a world that told them not to. By the time he died on August 20th, 2017, in his Las Vegas home, Jerry Lewis had lived almost every possible version of a life. He'd survived heart attacks, surgeries, chronic pain, addiction to prescription drugs, and the grinding toll of decades in the spotlight. His official cause of death listed end-stage heart and vascular disease, but his fans would say his heart had always worked overtime anyway. He made us laugh. He made us uncomfortable. And he left behind a legacy that refuses to sit neatly in one box. So now I want to hear from you. Which part of Jerry Lewis's story surprised you the most? The broken partnership with Dean, the French obsession, the estranged sons, the mystery woman, or the final decision to disinherit almost his entire first family? Do you see him differently now as a hypocrite, as a tragic figure, or simply as a wildly talented, deeply flawed human being? Tell me in the comments. Hit like if you believe that even the funniest legends deserve to be seen in full, not just as clowns, but as complicated people. And don't forget to subscribe, because in Hollywood, the loudest laughs often echo over the deepest cracks. And the next story we uncover might change the way you remember another icon forever.